My name's Sarah Clark. I sit as one of the patient experts in the Psychiatric and Psychological Aspects Working Group on the International Consortium. Also been doing a master's degree over the past few years in clinical and developmental neuropsychology. Presented at the Global Learning Conference in Dublin on Help Me Trust You after my misdiagnosis, and I shared then about my long and difficult diagnostic journey. Got diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in February 2020, and since then have been diagnosed with several comorbidities, including autism, in May last year. Rewind to 2018, and I was housebound because my fatigue levels and chronic pain had become so severe because I was deconditioned from being undiagnosed and not knowing how to manage my health properly. The past few years have been a very steep learning curve in learning around lifestyle modifications, building resiliency, self-reliance, and developing healthy daily habits to help keep me as well as possible. Have to admit that this is all very tedious and laborious, and there's days where I really resent spending a couple of hours each day just taking really basic care of myself. However, if I don't, I then feel a lot more unwell and don't function very well, and am more likely to end up in hospital, such as with autonomic problems and fainting. After getting diagnosed with a condition like EDS, many of us go through a process of grief, awareness, learning, and acceptance. Still not fully there because I was only diagnosed 3 years ago, but I've been through a journey of self-discovery. And over the next few slides, I'll share a few of my tips, which I found useful myself. Now regained some of my quality of life, starting to find joy and purpose and meaning in my life again, and starting to function a lot better. Share with you this quote by Krishnamurti, the Indian philosopher. "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." We're all work in progress, and there's some days where I still get things very wrong with my self-management. However, days where my baseline levels are a lot higher and I can function a lot better are days where I've put some thought and planning into prioritizing my activities and my time management and careful planning around pacing. It does take a lot of effort to live like this, and like I say, I do resent it. But I feel a lot more unwell if I don't do all these things to look after myself properly. When I do get things wrong, I am still hard on myself and give myself a bit of a hard time. But over the past few years, I've learned not to do this so much. Days when I feel unwell, I tend to have made a mistake in my self-management, such as eating or drinking something I've been intolerant to. In terms of the autism side of things, being in an overstimulating environment, for example, if you think of a hospital and think of all the bright lights and the loud noises, that can be extremely tiring. Sometimes we have no control over the environment we're in because we just have to go somewhere at a certain time. If I overcommit myself, I get very overwhelmed. So it's a careful balancing act between being able to function and feeling relatively well and feeling very unwell. My first tip would be to make a list of things that make you tired and to identify the challenges you face in your self-management. Now, I certainly know that if I've had a bad night's sleep, I haven't managed to eat and drink enough, I've had external stress, had to deal with stressful people perhaps, I can cope a lot less doing the same activity on a day when I'm a lot more tired than I would have done this day before. A few reasons for my own fatigue that I've identified as examples are the interactions between my comorbid conditions. I'm a student, so managing my workload, assignment deadlines, also volunteer and work in several places. And it's easy to overcommit myself and get overwhelmed and then get totally exhausted. Also, perhaps controversial to say this, but my interactions with the healthcare system are very tiring for me, especially where I face so much invalidation. And then just a few examples of my main challenges in managing my fatigue. It's to do with psychological frustration of all the to-do lists I make and wanting to push myself too far. And then I have to deal with setbacks and dealing with fluctuations. Also, from an autism point of view, and overstimulating environments are very tiring for me. Managing several conditions together, for example, if I've had a really bad night's sleep with my nightmares from my PTSD, this really, really impacts on my EDS symptoms the next day. So my second tip is to learn. We all learn in different ways, but personally, I find that watching past EDS conference presentations on YouTube is a good way for me to learn. And then my third tip is to take what you've learned and experiment to find what works for you as a unique human being. This is a matter of trial and error. Experiment with lifestyle changes. For example, does daylight first thing in the morning help your sleep cycle? Experiment with foods to avoid and simple things to help with autonomic problems such as compression clothing, and learning about fluid intake and what works for you personally. So my next tips are to do with psychological coping strategies. I used to give 150% to everything I did, and I've had to lower my own standards of perfectionism so I don't get so burnt out and fatigued. I used to fear my symptoms, and this creates a stress response in the body. Now I've learned to manage my symptoms a lot better than I used to and not fear them. Already mentioned the ability over time to readjust during flare-ups and to change your priorities that day. I've learned about the window of tolerance and building in little bits of rest time before and after activities to keep my nervous system recalibrated. Also, I find that gratitude and self-praise and compassion for the things that I'm good at is a good psychological coping strategy to manage my fatigue, and over time beating myself up less over things that I'm not so good at, and reflecting on progress over time and the improvements that I've made from the strategies I found. I don't have time to go through all my physical coping strategies and tips, so you might want to look at these later on the slides, but finding lifestyle approaches to managing my pain and fatigue and lowering levels of inflammation in my body have had a big impact to managing my fatigue. If I've got a day where I need to do a lot of work for university on the laptop, frequent breaks to lay down help my orthostatic intolerance and fatigue, and switching between cognitive and physical tasks is a helpful way to manage. Also dedicate a couple of hours each day to meditation, breath work, natural daylight, time in nature. I do resent this time, but it does keep me a lot more well and stable. Also find that doing a few breathwork courses has been effective in learning to breathe more effectively, and that's helped my pain and fatigue levels. Lastly, it's really important to build in time to have as much fun as you can. Now, these things aren't evidence-based for people with EDS, so I can't recommend them. All I can say is that they're strategies that have helped for me personally. So I've developed a toolbox of things like daily cold showers, floatation therapy and sensory deprivation tanks, red light therapy, hemp, and I believe that over time, these have all helped my fatigue levels by allowing my nervous system to function better and improve my heart rate variability and vagal tone, and to down-regulate my physiological stress responses. So my final tip would be to make a list on a good day of things you can do to help yourself on a bad day, because on a bad day, let's face it, we just can't think properly. And it's about climbing that recharge ladder. It's about understanding your baseline levels of functioning and how to reset yourself on a really bad day. Love this quote in the top left-hand corner. Almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. Thank you for listening.